Ragnar Lothbrok didn't need protein shakes or pre-workout. He built his legend on blood sausage, fermented shark, and raw seal meat. His enemies feared his blade, his diet, even worse. Could you survive a day on the food that fueled the Viking conquest? Before Ragnar Lothbrok became a Netflix sex symbol or a classroom case study, he was a walking nightmare, a berserker in human skin, a storm cloaked in leather and steel. To medieval monks, he wasn't just a Viking. He was the apocalypse in a longship. They say Ragnar raided Paris with only a few dozen ships, slaughtered kings, burned cities, and laughed while doing it. He claimed to descend from Odin himself. Whether that's true doesn't matter, because fear made him immortal. But here's the brutal truth. We don't even know if he truly existed. That's right. Ragnar might have been a legend stitched together from the blood-soaked lives of 5 different Norse warlords, each more vicious than the last. One burned his enemies alive. One was rumored to have eaten his rivals' hearts for strength. Another fed his prisoners to wolves, just to send a message. And all of them ate the same way, like predators. No forks, no table manners, just bare hands ripping through roasted seal flesh, sinking teeth into blood sausage, guzzling sour ale thick as mud. Their table wasn't a dining room, it was a battleground of bones and grease. Why? Because when your days are spent gutting Saxons and rowing for 18 hours straight, you don't care about gourmet. You care about survival. Fuel, fats, fermented power. That was Viking cuisine. That was the diet of death dealers. And Ragnar, real or not, embodied it. So forget the pretty plated stuff. This is the food of war, of frostbitten seas, of gods and graves. And it's what we're about to sink our teeth into next. When Ragnar and his kin weren't sailing through storms or burying axes in the chests of their enemies, they gathered around a roaring hearth, not for polite dinner conversation, but to feed the beast within. So what did a Viking actually eat? Whatever the gods didn't strike down, they devoured. Start with the meat. Not some dainty cut. Raw slabs of boar, venison soaked in blood, spit-roasted lamb with the fat dripping like molten armor. When they feasted, they tore flesh from bone with bare hands, teeth gnashing like wolves at war. And if you think they wasted a single scrap, think again. The liver gave strength. The heart, honor. The blood, life itself. They bled their kills and turned it into sausages so rich in iron it could sharpen a blade. Brains were fried, bones were boiled, and eyeballs, yes, eyeballs, were skewered and charred for the brave. Modern man flinches, the Viking thrived. Even dairy wasn't safe. No almond milk here. We're talking fermented whey, so sharp it could curl your spine. Sour milk aged in barrels of sweat and smoke, and cheese so dense it doubled as rations for raids. Their bread? Huh. Not the fluffy stuff in your toaster. It was black, dense, and often laced with tree bark. Yes, tree bark, because grain was scarce and winter didn't care. But bark meant fiber. Fiber meant survival, and survival meant another day to swing your axe. They drank mead, liquid gold made of fermented honey and wild herbs, sometimes spiked with psychedelic mushrooms to meet Odin face to face. No clinking glasses, no toasts to comfort. They drank to see visions, to feel the gods, to stare into death and scream louder. Because for Vikings, food wasn't pleasure, it was preparation. Every bite was a blade, every meal was a forge. You didn't eat to feel full, you ate to conquer. And here's the wild part, it worked. These weren't malnourished savages, they were battle-hardened tanks, forged by a diet low in fluff, high in survival, and rich in primal fuel. While we count calories, they counted kills. But hold on, beneath all that carnage and chaos, what if there was something more? What if the Viking diet wasn't just raw instinct, but rooted in ancient, misunderstood wisdom? That's exactly where we're going next. You might think the Viking diet was just savage survival. Eat what you kill, drink what you ferment, and pray to Odin you don't get scurvy. But what if I told you they were unknowingly ahead of their time by over 1,000 years? Modern science is only now catching up to the nutritional mastery hidden in their primal instincts. Let's break it down like a Viking breaks a ribcage. 1. Fat equal fuel. Long before keto hit your Instagram feed, Vikings were running on animal fats. Not carbs, not sugar, boar fat, marrow, bone broth, fermented cream. This was rocket fuel for long winters, grueling raids, and endless rowing. Science now calls it metabolic adaptation. They called it dinner. 2. Fermentation equals survival. While you're popping probiotics, they were fermenting everything from herring to goat milk. Their gut health, legendary. They knew how to store food for months without refrigeration, sauerkraut, soured milk, vinegar-soaked fish, each bite teeming with microbes modern nutritionists would kill for. 3. Organ meats equal micronutrient gold. While we fight over kale and multivitamins, Vikings devoured liver, heart, spleen, loaded with vitamins A, B, 12, iron, and zinc. They weren't guessing, they were absorbing ancestral knowledge passed down through fire and bone. 4. Bone broth equal collagen before it was cool. Boiling bones until they dissolved into liquid gold, they drank collagen-rich stews that kept joints strong and immune systems humming. Today, it's a $10 wellness shot. Back then, it was the breakfast of berserkers. 5. Mushrooms, herbs, and honey equal nature's pharmacy. They foraged like survivalists. Lion's mane mushrooms to sharpen the mind, thyme and juniper for inflammation, honey as an antimicrobial powerhouse. They didn't just survive, they thrived. Here's the twist. Their unrefined, brutal meals were closer to optimal nutrition than our processed, low-fat, sugar-slicked modern diet. And get this, the same fats, ferments, and feasts that gave Vikings strength are now being rediscovered by athletes, doctors, and biohackers. Coincidence? Or did Ragnar's crew know something we forgot? What if your ancestors weren't just warriors, but walking nutritionists? Because while we sipped soy lattes and stress over macros, they were loading up on iron, omega-3s, and unfiltered resilience. And that brings us to a new question. Was Viking food savage or sacred? Was it primal instinct or ancestral intelligence? We'll explore that next, in the rituals and meaning behind every savage bite. To the Vikings, food wasn't just fuel, it was sacred ritual, a social flex, and a weapon of legacy. Every feast told a story. Every bite held meaning. Let's start with the table itself. Not everyone got the same cut of meat. The choicest bits, the liver, the thigh, the rich back fat, went to the jarl, the warrior, the seer. Status was plated, not spoken. And then there was the drinking horn. That wasn't just for show. Passing the horn in a circle was a vow of trust. Mead wasn't just alcohol, it was tradition, storytelling, and divine offering rolled into one sweet fermented fire. Each toast, a prayer to Odin, Freya, or the fallen. Each sip, a connection to ancestors past and unborn. Rituals around food-shaped belief. When a Viking child ate their first stew cooked in bone broth and wild herbs, they weren't just eating, they were being inducted into the tribe, into centuries of inherited strength. Blood pudding, a symbol of using the whole animal, nothing wasted, everything honored. It might make modern stomachs turn, but back then, it was sacred. To waste was dishonor. To savor was to respect the hunt, the gods, and the earth. Feasts were battlegrounds of reputation. If you couldn't throw a good feast, you weren't a real leader. Food meant power, and famine meant vulnerability. Even the tools mattered. A carved wooden spoon, a blackened iron pot, a drinking horn etched with runes. These weren't just utensils, they were heirlooms, symbols of lineage, victory, and the raw beauty of survival. Now picture this, a roaring fire. A warrior returns from battle, blood on his axe, scars on his arms. He sits by the hearth. His mother places a hunk of roast lamb in his hands, fat dripping, skin blistered from flame. No words, just food. That's the language of legacy. That's Viking. And the craziest part? Modern culture eats with convenience. They ate with reverence. So when you bite into your next burger, remember, somewhere in your bloodline, there was someone who hunted, prepared, and prayed over every single meal. Food wasn't just eaten, it was earned. To die in battle was every Viking warrior's highest honor. But what came after death? A feast, not in sorrow, but in celebration. Because if you fell with axe in hand, you didn't just die, you ascended to Valhalla.
Welcome to Valhalla.
And what waited for you there? Endless mead, roasted boar, and glory. In Norse mythology, the Great Hall of Odin wasn't a quiet place of rest. It was a never-ending banquet. Warriors fought by day, feasted by night. The pig they devoured? Sehrimnir, a magical boar reborn every evening, cooked fresh again by the divine chef, Andhrimnir. That's right, even gods needed a good cook. But the Viking obsession with post-mortem meals didn't just stay in the sagas. It was practiced here, on Earth. When a great warrior died, his funeral was a feast. Picture this, a longship prepared for the pyre. Roasted meats, ale barrels, honey cakes, even a sacrificed animal or two placed on board with the body, not just to honor the dead, but to nourish them on the journey to the afterlife. It wasn't morbid, it was tradition. And then came the final fire. The ship, lit ablaze, drifting into the night, smoke rising, meat sizzling beside burning shields. The scent, both sorrow and celebration. A farewell wrapped in flame, fat, and fury. Even the living joined in. Villagers would feast on the same food offered to the fallen. It was their way of saying, we remember you, we honor you, we continue your fight. And in those moments, the food wasn't just nourishment, it was a bridge between realms. Today, we leave flowers at graves. Vikings, they left ribs and ale. Modern society might call that barbaric, but to them, it was sacred. So the next time someone calls your meal just food, remember, our ancestors believed it was a ticket to immortality, because in the Viking world, death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the greatest feast of all. So there you have it. Viking feasts weren't just meals. They were warfare, worship, and legacy, served on a wooden plate. But just when you thought the Vikings were history's wildest eaters, they met their match on horseback. Because, across the frozen steppes of Central Asia, another empire was rising, fiercer, faster, and even more brutal, led by a man whose name still echoes like thunder, Genghis Khan. But here's the twist: Mongol warriors didn't dine in great halls. They ate on the move, in the saddle, in the storm, and their diet? It was unlike anything the Vikings or anyone had ever seen. Fermented mare's milk, blood sausages, dried meat so tough it could double as armor. And yet, it built an army that conquered half the known world. How? What secrets were in their food? We'll ride into the Mongol Empire next time, and you won't believe what they ate before battle. Subscribe, saddle up, and stay hungry. Because this isn't just history, it's survival, one bite at a time.